And welcome back to the Ray Donovan TV show Sit Down and Talk and whatnot. For tonight we have episode 2 from season 6, and it just recently aired right now. It's called Staten Island Part 2. And it immediately picks up from where Staten Island Part 1 ended. Because if we remember from where Part 1 ended, basically, Ray winds up going to the apartment where Novak is and winds up seeing a dead body of a man laying in that apartment. So, of course, picking it up from there, we find out that actually Novak wasn't kidding about the video that she wanted to be removed, especially if she wants to try and run for mayor. So, basically, she tells Ray about the video, and Ray winds up taking some matters into his own hands, and basically keeps her locked up in the apartment and tells her not to go out and to keep quiet and not even move a muscle. So that happens there. But what's on the other side of the family? Well, the first thing is that we see that Mick is pulled out of the hospital. Well, what we see next is Mick is pulled out of jail and is heading straight towards the hospital in a serious condition, and what the cause may be is some sort of heart attack of some kind. But for all we know, he might be doing something very sneaky under the hands of the authorities. But outside of that, both Bridge and Smitty, I actually remember the name this time, Smitty winds up talking to Bridge about getting engaged and married and all that. They do, of course, Bridge does feel a little bit shocked by it and isn't sure how to react. But, of course, Smitty is a bit scared, seeing as how Bridge is part of the Donovan family, and the Donovan family is, well, they're scary as hell. But they think for a while, and of course they decide to get engaged. While all that's happening, Daryl winds up talking to some of his co-workers on the production of the film that he's doing. But he winds up receiving a call from Bunchy talking about how Mickey is in the hospital, as this goes into a crazy situation that's going out of hand and is a big surprise to any of the Donovan family that knows the information on what's been going on as of late. But we'll find out what happens. Let's get back to the Donovan story in New York. So Ray winds up, of course, buying a buttload of material for cleaning up the crime scene, as Officer So in New York, Ray winds up going to a hardware store and buying a bunch of material to help with the crime scene, as he winds up being called by Bridge and surprises him about the engagement that's recently happened in the show. And it really catches Ray off guard, especially since he hopes for the better, and especially since he had to go through all these troubles and issues that he went through, especially after Abby died. Because it's a struggle for him, because he's trying to get back on his feet. He has to learn how to get through life. For all we know right now, he's somewhere in the 5 stages of... 5 stages? Yeah, that could be it. The 5 stages of grief. So He could be somewhere in there. It's just I can't remember what those stages are. All I know is grievance and acceptance. But outside of that, I don't know the others. Anywho, he winds up getting another call by Officer Mack about a criminal that's tormented a poor young woman, so the woman can't say a thing to the authorities. But of course, this gets Ray thinking on what he can do for the situation. Which the one thing that Ray asks Officer Mack about is to find a untraceable gun for him to use. We all know what will happen, but we'll find out later on. And of course, Ray winds up returning to the apartment and gets Novak off the scene so that Ray can get to work. But of course, Officer Mack does what Ray told him to do and get the untraceable gun to him, telling Officer Mack not to go with him, but instead meet up with him and his son at the boxing gym, which Cherry is currently at right now. So this leads us into the other half of the story, where Ray winds up going into the stranger's phone, which includes the scene, the clip that Novak was talking about, with her being filmed and having sex between this guy. Which, of course, Ray goes in and deletes everything, leaving no trace of it behind. So it's virtually not there. At least it wasn't uploaded to the internet because, well, whatever's on the internet stays on the internet. Am I right? I'm right. Everyone's right. Right. And I'm quoting Clockwork Orange. Anywho, after he deletes the video, he winds up calling the auto shop guy that essentially just beat the living snot out of him in last week's episode. He calls him, asks about a situation, and for him just to keep quiet about the whole ordeal, the auto shop guy wants $120,000 cash. Just to keep low and just shut up about the situation. And while that happens, the automotive guy winds up coming in and, of course, winds up faking that he's retrieved the money and all that, which leads into the auto guy getting murdered by Ray with the untraceable gun, but also making it look like a bad drug deal situation gone wrong. Always the good ace of the book. Always thinking one step ahead. But now this leaves the untraceable gun in the hands of the automotive guy and the person that was filming Novak from earlier on. Anywho, Daryl winds up grabbing Connor to go to the hospital to visit Mick, thinking that he's actually going to die. But also, Daryl winds up receiving some information about the film, of course, that he's producing, and that there's some big meeting that's going on. Now, when we see Connor yet again, I thought, like, for a moment, like, they were actually going to fully write him out of the show. He's gone to military school, he'll have somewhere in the Marines or something like that, but I guess they're going to keep him on for a little while. Until they actually seclude him now. But anywho, let's move on. So Mick winds up waking up while the officer that's basically cuffed him winds up using the restroom, as Mick winds up convincing, or at least tries to convince Bunchy, especially since he's in a very bad situation right now, to try and get him out of the hospital and from the police officer, for him to, well, get revenge. Because in the recap before the episode really started, they showed a little bit of scenes involving, like, last season we saw Daryl murder one of the FBI agents, and Ray winds up calling in and tells someone that, yeah, Mick is responsible for murdering this guy, please take him away, Mr. Thank you very much. And of course he winds up being taken away, and for all we know of that last season, because season 6 wasn't answered until sometime this year, that we didn't know what was going to happen. It's like, now he's in jail, we'll no longer have to deal with him. But also, like, the actor John Voight is getting really old, so who knows if he's actually going to die during mid-production. So you might as well try and execute him off in the show before he actually dies in production of the next season. But still, I was left the same way when Ray jumped off the building in the season 5 finale. But at least they brought him back to life in this. Anywho, let's get back to the story. Mick winds up convincing Bunchy to try and get him out, which, of course, he's hesitant. But since he's got that whole ordeal going on with his wife and the daughter that she has, that the both of them have, but because he's been a no-good dirty drunk, and with all the crap that's been going on with him, he's basically under an emotional stress, and he's desperate to do anything. So, of course, he has to wind up deciding, okay, let us do this. So he winds up going into the hardware store to gather parts. At this point, you don't know whether or not he's actually going to do it or not. But from the way he goes into the hardware store, it's a guarantee that it will happen. But while Samantha winds up returning to the apartment and listen to Ray's situation from last season, his troubling past, and the whole ordeal that's been going on with him, Samantha tries to help him out a bit, especially since the elections are coming up. But really, he's going through the 5 stages of grief. Yeah, it should still be called that, 5 stages of grief. Like, he should be, like, he's trying to learn how to go on with his life without the dearly beloved Abby Donovan that he lost last season. He's going through that, and it's going to take a good long while till that gets out of his head. At least up until this point, of course. So, as Bunchy returns to the hospital where Mickey's being cared for, Bunchy winds up pulling out a hammer that he got from the hardware store and essentially just kills the guy and breaks Mickey out of the hospital. Then, of course, this is right as Daryl and Connor are getting out of the car and into the hospital. They're like, hey, have you seen Mickey anywhere? They're like, straight down that hole. Go over, see a murder crime. And they're like, He's escaped! So now Bunchy is roped up into the situation, and into big regards, he is now a fugitive. And definitely, it'll be interesting to see how Mickey will try and get revenge on Ray for what he's done. We won't know until next week. Especially with that twisted call that he made. Anywho, we move on to the final act of the story, where Ray has successfully cleaned up the crime scene, and Officer Mack is relaxed about the whole thing. And Terry winds up talking to Ray about seeing Mickey in the hospital. But, of course, since Ray still hates Mickey's guts, he's like, fuck him. And that's what he says. I'm not kidding. But in the final act, he winds up receiving a call from Daryl saying that Mickey has escaped from the hospital. As, of course, he says he'll think about it as he turns off his phone, gets up after viewing the Brooklyn Bridge, walks off in this very cool shot, which, if you ever seen the Ray Donovan promos and whatnot on YouTube, and you stay until, like, the end slate, this shot is within that video. Ray walks in the middle of a New York street. The camera is pointed down towards him, as Ray is continuing to walk towards the middle of the street in New York. No cars are passing by, some cars in the distance. The camera slowly pans down and shows the audience and Ray the big environment, the new scenery that he's going to have to deal with. That crane shot, that like whole shot where it goes from here, this is the top shot, to suddenly tilting straight and almost into the sunlight, that is a really amazing shot. Absolutely love it. But it's also the biggest thing that we'll ever expect from this show. But it also shows that Ray has got much more on his hands. And this ain't his home in LA. This is a new turf for him. And he's going to have to learn that in New York, it's a dog-eat-dog world. And that was Staten Island Part 2. I'd say it's a great start for the story. It really answered the questions that we noticed from the first episode, like what was going to happen next, and how this whole ordeal is going to go down. And it looks like we're probably going to expect ourselves a very wonderful season this time around. Yeah, a good season for once. Because, people had trouble with Season 5 last season. I mean, I thought it was okay. The flashbacks were a little bit weird, to say the very least, because, look, Season 4 ended with a happy ending, and then Season 5 a lot of people had issues with, and even some just stopped watching the show entirely until the Abby parts were gone. Which took a good long while for that to end, but anywho, Staten Island Part 2, I'd say it's a great episode. It's establishing our situation, it's establishing what's going to happen, what we can expect this season, and most definitely what we're going to look forward to when the show comes on. What else can I say? Staten Island Part 2? Well executed. Anywho, Staten Island Part 2 of Ray Donovan. What do you guys think about it? And in general, be looking forward to the rest of the season of Ray Donovan to try and wash the bad mouth out of last season. It was decent for me, but just leave your thoughts below, and I will see you guys next week for the new episode of Ray Donovan. When we'll expect episode 3, well, I don't know what the next episode is going to be for. I don't start these journals until next week. So, you're going to have to find out what the episode is next week. But, as always, I am the Ferb Guy, and I will see you guys next time.